when I was on the road, everything was about making the bike go faster. And then I had a bit of peace, and I got home and I was reading Harriet, my daughter, a bedtime story. And I finished the story, and I said, "Night night, Harriet." Gave her a kiss, and I said something like, "Is it good having Daddy home?" I don't know why I said it, and she looked at me straight in the eyes, and she said, "Yes, Daddy, but you keep saying that."
Hey folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Mason Gravely. This episode's really exciting because Mark has been personally a huge inspiration to me. He is just a legend, just a total legend in the world of cycling, the world of endurance and adventure sports, and just, a general adventurer as well. He's done some incredible things, including what we're talking about today, 2 circumnavigations of the globe on bicycle, which is just mind-boggling. And you're thinking, if you're thinking to yourself, how do you bike around the world? Because there's oceans. Don't forget about those. Well, that's a great point. But Guinness World Record put out this kind of parameters for around the world cycling, which basically says you can't deviate too far from where you start. As far as if you go around the equator, you got to kind of stay within 5 to 10 degrees north and south, and then also it has to have a minimum number of miles that you cycle, which is 18,000. And so Mark has done that faster than anybody, which was just under 80 days, 79 days. The first time he did it, it was, almost pretty much twice that. And the second time, he shaved quite a bit off of it. But if you want to hear more standard, like how did you do it? What were the highs? What were the lows? If you want to hear kind of more of that standard, overview of the adventure itself, I would encourage you to look at a number of different, short films that have been made, interviews, podcast episodes. Anytime I have someone on the show who has done so much as Mark and has been, talking to media for 20 years like Mark has, I try to do it just a little bit different, make it a little more interesting for them as guests because, you might get tired of telling the same stories every day. But this episode I thought came out really incredible. Mark is just honestly one of the most incredible storytellers I've ever heard. So it was a super, super exciting, enjoyable episode to interview him. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. But if you want more of what he's talking about and more specifics around each of his adventures, including these circumnavigations, there are a ton of resources out there. And also, I encourage you to check out his book. But anyway, enough of me talking about this. Let's start talking to Mark. And by the way, we jump just kind of right into the conversation. He and I are talking. We're recording the whole time. And at some point, I was like, the interview's pretty much already started. So here it is.
It's funny because if you cycle around the world twice, it doesn't matter what else you do in your life. That's what you're going to be known for. And it's funny. I mean, I've got buddies who are Olympians and have done all these, buddies who have climbed Everest. And there's something about if you do something which is so easy to remember, like it's got that ring about it, like nothing else really. And there's worse things to be known for. At the end of the day, if all you're going to be known for is cycling around the world, I can live with that.
No, you're right. I think it's the ability to share it. If you don't, this is a tangent, but Alex Honnold, who climbed El Capitan in Yosemite a few years ago, free soloed it. That was very close to the same time as another athlete, Tommy Caldwell, who did the most difficult route on the same rock, and it took 19 days longer. Alex Honnold's climb was 2 hours.
Dawn Wall.
The Dawn Wall, exactly.
Both amazing films. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Both amazing films just happened to come out at the same time. We were able to get Tommy on the show, and by all accounts, Tommy's achievement was more impressive in the sense of the difficulty, the sheer planning. I mean, they both were just off the charts. But after, going into depth about both of them, Tommy's, I was like, man, that is an incredible story. But it's harder to tell and it's harder to remember. And I think that's why the skyrocketing popularity of what Alex did was because the sheer how easily it was to communicate. I climbed this rock, this mountain with no help, no ropes, no anything. The danger was so real. So I think that might be part of it too. Just around the world in 80 days is so easy to communicate with people.
Yeah.
And for someone totally unfamiliar with the sport, they can grasp that.
And I've always been keen that my stories transcend my sport. I think it's so easy to live within your sport. You know, I'm passionate about sharing stories. I mean, for sure, I'm an athlete. My passion has always been firsts and fastest, and trying to do things that have not been done before. I've always been inspired by the idea of not just repeating history, but really shifting the dial. If you look at my track record, and this is not like an ego point, like I've never tried to break somebody's record. I've never tried to pip. I've always gone out there and gone, how can you do this fundamentally differently? And it's why both times I've cycled around the planet, I've taken, months off the record, even going the Cairo to Cape Town World Record or some of these other big trips. I've got huge respect in those that have gone before. You learn from history, but you just don't base your targets on it. You always go bottom up planning. What's the art of the possible here? And I guess what I'm most proud of with my teams over the last 15 years is that quiet confidence to just be really disruptive, to get out there and take a fundamentally different approach, and just to then share the stories in a way which is relevant to more than just other bike riders. Like, I always want to put these stories on a wider platform and share it in a way which you get. It's as much sharing the stories about the people and the cultures and the places as it is, my physical journey and that of my team around me. I think it gives you such a unique perspective on the planet of the places you're going through. I mean, these expeditions have taken me to 130 countries, and that's a privilege. And I genuinely want to be able to share that in a way which gives people the quiet confidence to push their own ambitions, which is not going to be cycling around the planet, but it's going to be the best feedback possible is when people turn around to me and say, you gave me the license, you gave me the confidence to do X. And it was their passion, something they wanted to do, and they turned an idea into reality. That's the best feedback I can ever get.
When did that start for you? Have you always been this way?
I guess not, because I was homeschooled until I was 12. So I was on a small farm on the foothills of the Highlands of Scotland. And I didn't have normal. I mean, my friends were my two sisters because we just didn't leave the farm. We lived and worked on the farm until I was 12. So when you don't have a playground, when you don't have normal connections with the world, when you don't have those formative experiences, I didn't grow up thinking, what's my place in the world, because I was kind of shut off. And I was doing adventure sports because I was like just a feral kid. I was just, on the farm working hard. I was outside way, way more than I was inside, horse riding, skiing, cycling, they were a big part of my life growing up. And so then when you don't interact normally and build, normal friendships until you're a teenager, that's really late. So I was kind of out there on my own doing all this stuff, climbing mountains and getting into sport, like adventure sports in a big way. But then when I started to do expeditions, what I loved as much as the actual trips themselves was getting to the planning phase, what went before, trying to support good causes and charities, and then afterwards getting to share my story. I genuinely got a buzz from that. And I don't know if it was just this little sort of homeschooled kid who had never had that level of interaction. I'd never been in a playground before. I didn't know what those like social structures were like. So when I sort of first experienced that as like a 12-year-old, when I first cycled across Scotland, or I did my first 1,000-miler down the length of the UK when I was 15, there was nobody to tell me that wasn't normal. I was rubbish at like football and rugby and all the sports you're meant to be good at over here in the UK, but I excelled at all the adventure sports. And all my friends looked at me and were like, you're not kind of sporty in a normal sense. You can't do team sports, but for some reason, like, you're good at all this crazy stuff. And it gave me a place in school, in high school, when I was really struggling. You imagine what that transition's like. So I guess I'm struggling to answer your question, but have I always had that? I had a unique upbringing which gave me a a great sense of independence and self, so I could go and do this stuff. And then when I was old enough to express myself, I kind of got a real buzz out of sharing the stories, and I've always enjoyed that.
So you didn't have these natural boundaries that would socially just, be implanted in kids. So you didn't set these limits on yourself that other kids probably did based on just peer-to-peer interaction that would let them know, hey, this isn't normal. That's really fascinating.
I mean, it's interesting because when you grow up, you don't think about these things. You don't have any context. But now I've got my own kids and I live in a city and they go to a normal school. Of course, I can see this incredible freedom that I had. Interestingly, I've got two sisters and we've all grown up to be very different people with different sort of views on the world. And, I think nature, nurture, that's an episode in itself. But the biggest freedom I had was my mother not saying, no, don't be crazy. Like, you imagine when you have those little acorns of an idea as a kid. Kids have crazy ideas every day. And you know what? If you turn them into actions, if sometimes they're going to fail, sometimes they're going to hurt themselves, but guess what? They're going to learn. So if parents say no, you never know what that idea will become 10, 20, 30 years down the line. So I'm 38 years old. And I can very clearly look back over my entire life. And there's a chronology. It looks sure-footed. It looks professional. It looks kind of inevitable. That's not how life feels as you live it. I'm riddled with the same insecurities and the same strengths and weaknesses that we all are as human beings. But I guess when I was a kid, so when I turned around to my mum, Una, when I was 11 years old and said, I want to cycle the length of the UK, which is 1,000 miles. Rather than saying, don't be stupid, go and do something else, she said, why don't you try something smaller first? Because you've not really cycled off the farm before. And so she supported me to ride coast to coast across Scotland, which is only like 130 miles. But as a 12-year-old kid, it was cool. And over the next decade, these ambitions grew. And you can imagine when I graduated from college age 22, 23, this had grown into the freedom that I could cycle around the planet. I could go 18,000 miles. And guess who the first person who then came to work for me on the business? My mum. She worked with me for like 12, 13 years as what I call base camp. And the team grew. And, I've worked with a lot of people over the years and the projects have become more complicated and expensive. But, family's always been at the heart of it because, I had that license from my mum just to, as you say, not say no. Just give it a go.
Do you find it hard as a parent to reflect that same attitude your mom did?
I mean, yes, because I'm not homeschooling my kids, and we're just not in the same physical space. We're not in the countryside on a farm, but I do try and instill and develop the same sense of curiosity in my kids. They've got it naturally. So when we go for a walk, I really encourage them to not walk on the path. If they say, can I go up here? The answer is yes. Can I climb that tree? Absolutely. So I'm always encouraging them to follow their curiosity. And I'm often asked, what would I do if my daughters turned around when they were 16 or 18 and said, hey, Dad, I want to cycle around the world? And I've thought that through at length, and I'm very clear. By the time they get to the age where they have that independence of mind and want to do whatever they want to do. It doesn't need to be sport, but whatever they're passionate about. I plan that we've had enough shared experiences together that they know their own mind and their own body well enough to back themselves. The only reason I would worry about my kids is if I hadn't had those shared experiences with them, because people come to me all the time. You can imagine. I'm sure they do. They contact you as well and just say, I want to do this. I want to row an ocean. I want to cycle around the world. I want to climb Everest. And I say two things. I say, look, shoot for the stars, dream big. Absolutely. But learn your trade, genuinely learn your trade. Like there's no shortcuts. This is not sort of the Instagram world that we all watch. You've got to be able to know yourself and back yourself in really challenging circumstances when you're taking on major expeditions. And if you can build that awareness of who you are and make mistakes and mess up, when you're in the, when you're a kid. I worry about people who are so protected from, the dirt and the dangers in the real world that, guess what? You can't just become that in a single moment at some point in the future. So I'm always cautioning people. I'm saying, do it, absolutely, but build up to it. And, I was lucky to start early and have the support of my parents to build up.
Sounds like it was them that really opened this door to you, or didn't close it at least. Maybe that door was open for you and encouraged it in a way that's so fascinating. That's great to know as a young parent. That's very interesting to hear, and it's something I think about a lot. What am I going to tell him when he wants to do the thing I wanted to do? And knowing the dangers now, knowing how naive I was, knowing how frankly stupid I was for doing it, and how legitimate my parents' fears were, I need to make sure that I'm ready to say yes too, no matter how hard it is.
It's so hard. It's so hard to swallow your own fears with your kids. It really is. But there's something so powerful about sharing those adventures. Tell me, have you had Ricky Gates on the show yet?
Ricky Gates, I know who you're talking about. No, I haven't.
Okay, you should get him on. You should get him on the show. I was about a year ago when COVID kicked off, and we were just starting to lock things down in the UK. So that was like February, March time. I was listening to the Rich Roll podcast, and he had Ricky on, who's a US ultra runner, adventure runner. And, Ricky's run coast to coast, but then he took on that project to run every street in San Francisco. It's a pretty amazing story.
Yes. Yep. I watched that. That's right.
Yeah. It's worth checking out on YouTube. Anyway, I was sort of in lockdown with my kids. I mean, I would typically before that travel every week. I was away half the time. And suddenly I was here with my kids. And I was like, what am I going to do? My whole world's just fallen off a cliff. I'm not going to do all my big expeditions and films and travel for the year and events. And then I was listening to Ricky, and I was genuinely inspired. I thought, run every street. So I picked out the A to Z of Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland, and I mapped it out. It's not quite as big as San Francisco, but my twist on that story was I said to my 6-year-old daughter, I said, hey, let's rather than just coming out for a cycle, like she would cycle her bike and I would run, why don't we try and just do this area? And it became like a little puzzle. And over the next 3 months, we went out 5 or 6 days a week, typically an hour at a time. And I would like run a 10K. She would just ride her bicycle. And we covered every single cul-de-sac, every road, every roundabout, every street in Edinburgh. And, I was messaging Ricky as we went and telling him about my my adventures with my daughter. And it was quite cool to see like my neighborhood, my city, but in a very unfamiliar way. But the best part of it was I spent over 100 hours with my 6-year-old daughter. Me running, her cycling, just shooting the breeze, just talking about the world, just reflecting on stuff and it was a horrible time for work. It was a horrible time for so many reasons, but to do something as a project, like a genuine project, not just like, let's go for a hike today, but like over 3 months, just father and daughter do a project and take on our entire city. Hey, I mean, that was the best thing last year.
For someone who's done as much as you have, did you find it fulfilling like you would other adventures?
100%. 100%.
That's great news for the people that can't cycle around the world.
I'm often asked that. Like people often say, do you know what happens when people meet me? They always put themselves down. So like whenever I do a talk, the first thing that somebody says after that, like I've finished and I'm doing a book signing, the first thing they reflect on something I've said. Oh, that story you told me about capsizing in the Atlantic or free riding down the side of a volcano. The first thing they say is always about me. The second thing they say is always about their own ambitions. And it's fascinating when you do this thousands of times and meet thousands and thousands of people. People live life with one eye in the mirror. And what I mean by that is you follow other people or you're interested because you're interested in yourself. You're interested in pushing your own ambitions and figuring out your place in the world. And there is no scale. Like, okay, for me, cycling around the world was my Everest. That was what I built up to through my career. But you could get the same emotional response. You could get the same sense of fulfillment from riding a century or from doing an Ironman or like whatever that is in terms of magnitude for you based on your life experience, your physical ability, who you are. the emotional response, the endorphins you get, and the memories, the memories that you will take with you for the rest of your life, you can't put them on a scale. Like, it's not one's bigger than the other. And just because I've cycled around the world twice doesn't mean that's my biggest memory. It just happens to be the longest trip, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I 100% what you get about that. We hear it all the time with this show, and I've done things, but frankly, it's nothing compared to some, and others. I talk to people who it sounds like they have more fulfillment, more joy in their voice when I talk to them about a marathon versus something that took me 6 months to do. You know what I'm saying? So it really is relative, and it really is. It's just finding what it is for you. I know it sounds, I don't know, overused or cliche, but it's true. Wow, interesting. So I'd love to jump into or talk a little bit about what led to riding around the world that first time. I know you've probably told these stories 100,000 times, but it grew to the point where that was possible, and you did it, and you absolutely crushed the record. Why did you beat the record by so much rather than just barely beat it? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think to be honest, if you'd interviewed me on the finishing line in Paris at the Arc de Triomphe back in 2008 when I finished, I would tell you that's the fastest I could ever cycle around the world. I'd left it all out there. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done.
194 days.
194 days. Because it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But, now with a bit of perspective, it looks like kindergarten. And I don't mean to patronize the first time I cycled around the world, but it is genuinely a case of putting it in perspective in terms of who I am as an athlete and the teams that I've worked with over the years. And it kind of fits neatly with your previous question. Like, one is not better than the other. They just happened at a different point in my life, and I had more experience and I went faster the second time by a significant margin. But let's put this into context. In my book, the ultimate sort of cycle journey is the circumnavigation. I mean, we can argue all day long about all the great bike trips on the planet, but the circumnavigation, how fast you can get around planet Earth, that's the world. That's the biggie. And I've always, when I was a student, I wasn't setting out to have a career in adventure sports. I didn't know how that could even be a thing. And I just thought, I want to go on one big trip to end all trips. And I thought, if I've only got one chance, let's cycle around the world. And the only reason I looked at the circumnavigation world record is because I assumed that the guys and the girls who had gone for the record would be the most professional, have the best route, have the best information. So I just researched the best because I thought, well, then I'll take those ideas and I'll do it in my own more amateur way. I mean, I was a 22-year-old guy. I'd grown up in the age of Ellen MacArthur smashing the round the world sailing record. So I assumed that the round the world cycling record was similar. I thought it would be the most professional, coveted record in the cycling. And yet, going back, 15 years now, it wasn't. Like, when I first spotted it, and not to be unkind to anyone who had cycled around the world before that on the record, but the record was 276 days. And for an 18,000 mile record, which, as I said, not to be unkind, is pretty slow. You just do the maths on it. It's not fast. So it wasn't really that it was me being super professional. It was more of a feat of entrepreneurship than being a good athlete. I just spotted something that people hadn't done properly, and I was like, wow. Hang on a second, I could break a world record. And then I walked into the BBC and managed to somehow get a documentary commissioned. And, the rest was history. I went off and I said I was going to ride around the world in 195 days, which was based off a really crude plan of riding 100 miles a day for half a year and then taking a day off a fortnight. And it worked. I came home in 194 days and 17 hours. So the comparison is I broke the previous record by, a couple of months, but I broke my target by 8 hours, which when you're out there on your own, like trekking style, carrying all your kit, going through, sleeping in mosques in Iran under armed escort, skirting the Pakistan-Afghan border around the Helmand. I mean, this was a proper adventure. And then, you come home within 8 hours of what you said you would. And it really made me go, hang on a second. Is that really my personal best, or have I just done what I said I'm going to do? And from that day since, it's made me kind of obsessed. You can ask my team. It's made me kind of obsessed with this idea of, as an athlete, you'll always justify where you end up. The only way to really do it well is to figure out the art of the possible before you start, and then read it off script. And I had 40 people working on. It's crazy when you compare, because the first time I cycled around the world, I was on my own, and I had like my mum, at home with a phone and her laptop at the kitchen table, and that was kind of it. The second time I went around the world a few years ago, there was 40 people working on that project. It cost a lot. It took 2.5 years in the planning. I had a media crew based out of Cape Town. I had my on the road support crew, normally 8 people at a time. I had base camp back here in the UK. It was a huge logistical, media, and performance task. But I boiled it down to 75 days riding, 3 days flights, 2 days contingency, which, if you add it up, gets to 78 days around the planet. And that's the record is 78 days, 14 hours and 40 minutes. So I know that's like a bit glib. That's a bit of a short way of saying it, but I've been kind of obsessed by this idea that even for an 18,000 mile race, just you gotta really dial the plan, and then just live it, just absolutely live it. And I guess I feel lucky that my career started at a time when there wasn't such mass interest in these things. Even 15 years ago, for sure. I mean, over the last 100 years, there's been phenomenal endurance and adventure bike riders, but for some reason, the circumnavigation had been missed out. And you couldn't just graduate now and head off on your own and break the record. It's become professional. But I was lucky when I first spotted it. It was pretty amateur, and I got my chance.
It reminds me of that. I think it's Parkinson's law that talks about the work will fill the time allotted. You have a job, you allot a certain amount of time, no matter how much work that is, you fill the time with the work, and it will be completed with how much time you give it. You gave yourself 195 days that first time, and you hit it right on the money. You did it with 80 days the second time, and you hit that right on the money. It probably made you start to think, where could I have shaved? What could I really do this in? And I'm sure that can drive you crazy if you're not careful.
As an athlete who's obsessed with breaking records, this idea of you'll never do better than what you set out to do, it drives you insane, because you can talk about marginal gains and, changing this and that and aerodynamics and nutrition and all the different factors. But ultimately, it's just about being ruthlessly consistent, just turning up every shift and doing the time. And there's so many things as an athlete, as an endurance athlete, which are outside of your control. You just got to deeply believe that the long-term averages will take care of themselves. And as human beings, you couldn't live with yourself if you didn't justify where you ended up. So there's always a case of sort of just making it fit. Like, I left it all out there. I did all I could. It couldn't have ended any other way. But that's clearly not the case. If you're honest enough with your own performances, we only affect a minority of our performances, the environment and everything else, and how our psychology plays into our physical performance. It's fascinating. And as your endurance increases, as you go from, an event that's going to be over in a couple of hours' time to something, for me, that lasts for months and months and months and months, the sleep deprivation and just your immunology and all the other factors which allow you to be consistent, to perform. It's fascinating.
It's immensely fascinating. So for setting the first record, you did this self-supported. It was all on you, thousands of miles from the people you love or care about or know. And the
Yeah.
second time was this totally different setup with a crew and an RV and a second bike and just logistical nightmare. Which of the two? I don't even know how to describe it. Is it harder or more challenging to figure out, or more challenging to finish when you say you will? Which of the two are your style now? And there's beauty in both, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, I'll answer your last bit first. What's my style now? I would say somewhere in the middle.
Somewhere in the
I,
middle.
I would I would say the full on old fashioned trekking, like big heavy bike, 5 pannier bags, cook stove and just the works that I had the first time around is not something I would readily go back to. It's amazing, and I knew nothing different at the time, but it's pretty slow on the grand scale of things, and you don't need all that stuff. The extremes of the round the world in 80 days, do I need to keep doing that to myself? I mean, people often say to me, Mark, I'd love to do what you do. And I always sort of jokingly say, I think you like the idea of what I do. I mean, like, honestly, riding 240 miles a day every single day for 2.5 months, getting up at 3:30 in the morning, riding from 4 a.m. through till 9:30 every single day for 2.5 months. It's kind of torture. You're time trialing for 1,200 hours. If you mess up in any one of those 4-hour blocks, you can say goodbye to your 80-day record. So the pressure, the pressure from my team, myself, the finances, it was just, I couldn't mess up. Like, it was just torture at times, and yet it was exhilarating, and it was everything I dreamt of. So I can't really sell around the world in 80 days to anyone. You've got to madly, deeply want to do something like that, because it's not fun in a normal sense of the word. So where am I going with this? My perfect place in terms of being a bike rider is probably something like the Africa World Record, which I broke a few years before, which was Cairo to Cape Town. It was 6,000 miles, and that was ultra light, carbon Di2 setup with frame bags, completely unsupported, still needing the friendship of strangers, still completely connected to the culture and the world around me, but still going far and fast every day. So that's the perfect place for me, which is sort of like a halfway house between the two. But you got to put these trips in order. I couldn't have done them the other way around. Like, the Around the World in 80 Days was a culmination of everything I'd learned in my career. I mean, if you'd said to me when I was a 22, 23-year-old kid, when I first cycled around the world, that one day I would go back and do it in 80 days, I told people for years and years and years, I will never cycle around the world again. Why would I do that twice? And yet when I came to do it, it might be the same thing in terms of the record, but the experience was a million miles apart. And let's be honest, the first cycle around the world was a better adventure. It was a much better adventure. It was not just a better adventure because I had time to soak it all up. I was riding a century every single day for half a year, which is plenty of time to still do stuff off the bike. And the real adventure was stuff off the bike rather than on the bike. But it was also because of where I was in my life. Like, I'd never really traveled before. I'd done a bunch of stuff in the US and Europe, but I'd never slept under the roads in Turkey, or been with armed guards, or cycled through the Australian outback with 3,000 miles of headwind and woken up with huntsman spiders in my tent. It was just I ended up in so many weird / dangerous situations in that first cycle around the world, which was just such a coming of age. I will never have another expedition which I experienced in the way I did. I mean, I always say to people, like, just really appreciate those first expeditions. Like, just try not to live them through social media, especially your first couple of big trips, because they're such important memories for your own personal experiences. And the more you go on, the more you crave that same view on the world. By the time I came cycling around the world the second time, I saw the world like a slideshow. I didn't stop anywhere. I mean, I was just a machine on the bike racing.
Did you find that difficult? Because, you mentioned 240 miles a day with this tenacity that is unnatural in most people's lives. It's like a tenacity of a football game that's 90 minutes, but for 80 days. I can't even imagine.
it's a strange headspace you end up in, because nobody could pay you to do that. It's not the sort of thing in life where you could do it because of the fame or the fortune. Not that cycling around the world, there's. I always say to people, if the sum total of your ambition is to pay your mortgage and get by, then don't do these sorts of things.
Right. Easier way to do it.
You've got to have a real fire in your belly to, before you get to the broadcast, before you get to the sponsorship, before you get to the professional elements of it. You've got to have that kid inside you that wants to prove something to yourself. And it's not the same for everyone, but I do find that people who have a real mischief in them, a real sort of want to prove themselves, not in an ego alpha sense, but like have that want to, when I'm on an expedition or I'm on a trek and I see someone, like when the chips are down, it's storming and it's really awful, and I look around me and like somebody's just got a bit of a wry smile and you can see their humor's building, and you're like, I get it, like, and you make a connection. And it's not everyone that does that. And I don't know what that mischief is that allows people to really sort of not relish but thrive when you're under pressure. I've seen it time and time again in the high mountains, in the oceans, in the Arctic, in the deserts, in difficult places where you've got to fundamentally want to be there. It's not just being an athlete and being strong and sort of gym fit, but you've got to sort of mentally have. And I do find that people who thrive in these environments tend to be not running away from something, but they tend to have something in their formative years that makes them have a real independence of mind. And that doesn't mean you can't be a team player, but you really do need to think for yourself and be able to operate under a lot of pressure. When I was putting together my team for the Round the World in 80 Days, so we had every morning we took loads of samples to basically see how I was, like saliva samples, and stood on scales, and I would take bloods at certain points, and we were just basically saying, like, as an athlete, can I keep doing what I'm doing? And my cortisol level, so my stress hormone, was sky high throughout the trip. And then normally, as you say, like if you were playing a ball game or you were like a sprinter, your cortisol would be significantly elevated for that period of performance. But it's pretty abnormal for an adventure athlete, for an ultra endurance athlete, to have such an elevated cortisol level for 2.5 months. I'm not sure what it does to your longevity, putting yourself under that amount of strain. But anyway, when you look at my numbers, my bloods and my saliva samples over 2.5 months, I was living, I don't just need to say anecdotally it was pretty stressful and I was massively sleep deprived, but you can see the numbers. Like, I'm just in a weird place, like that ability to get the blinkers on and just stay in the zone. But you've got to, like, I ended up shunning company. I really struggled. Actually, through Canada and the US was kind of the hardest, because I was back in the English speaking world. By that time, the fame of the trip was building. So many people wanted to come out and be a part of it. So every day, tens, if not hundreds of people were just showing up at the roadside with, homemade cookies and banners and wanting to ride their bike with me, which was phenomenal. But I was in a harder and harder place as the race went on. And you imagine people join you and they want to just talk. They want to say, oh, how was Mongolia? How was, Russia? And also towards the end, starting to celebrate the finish, even though I'm like 2,000 miles away from the finish. So when you, as an athlete, take yourself out of the race and suddenly become sort of almost an ambassador for what you're doing, you can't do both. So I felt like a bit of an asshole. Like at times I said to my team, I can't do both. I can't be the guy on stage sharing my story, but also really commit to what it takes to be this sleep deprived and to perform for 16 hours a day as an athlete. And my Laura Penhall, my performance manager, who's worked at 5 Olympic Games, she was like, well, of course, like I would never have my Olympians, running their race with the fans running alongside them, having a chat. Like, it's only in the adventure world where you get that crossover where, I think it's amazing when people come out and support me, but being honest, it's sometimes hard to put yourself under that amount of pressure to perform but also to relate well to the world around you. And only people like, that's why you pick your performance team so carefully, because you need people who get it. You need people who understand what that pressure is like.
So fascinating. I never would have thought about it that way, that it did build momentum towards the end there, especially towards the end when you got close. And that's when it's most crucial not to mess up. You know, you're sprinting to use the restroom, sprinting to eat, to flying. And they're like, hey, you've got 80 days. What are you rushing for?
I remember I landed in Lisbon in Portugal, and it was 1,100 miles to the finish. And I had, 4.5 days or something to get through Portugal, through Spain, up over the Pyrenees and back through France. And everyone was just talking about the finish. And I was so relieved. I'd just finished 5,500 miles from Anchorage, and I was just beat. I was in such a dark place. Getting on that plane was such a relief. And I landed, and I got through the first couple of days. I was picking up momentum, and then I had an awful day. I turned north from Madrid. I got food poisoning. I was being really sick on the bike, so I couldn't keep the food down. I was into the headwind for a long, dark day. And then at night, about 10 o'clock at night, I was coming off this pass. I'd climbed for most of the afternoon into the headwind, and then I came off the pass. It was super late. I'd already been on the bike for 17 hours, and I crashed. I just hit something in the road and I crashed. Didn't help that I hadn't kept food down and I was feeling pretty weak. But I was just so angry with myself. Like, I was just beside myself with anger. My team were trying to, get me into the support vehicle and check I was okay and check the bike. And I just grabbed the bike and got back on it and finished the descent. It was reckless. It was really reckless in retrospect. But I was just so angry with myself, because you can imagine for 2.5 months nearly, you've been focused, and if you mess up in any given second, the entire race is over. And there I was, like 2 days from the finish, and I had a crash which could have ended it all. And honestly, the outpouring of emotion and that, what it meant was pretty evident for everyone.
Did it feel out of reach at that point?
Yeah. I'm struggling to even find a way of describing it, because it meant so much, and it had been such a singular focus for so long that by the time I got there, that final day, I almost lost focus. Like, it was almost unbelievable. Like, I was looking at I met a big bunch of riders near Versailles and then into the outskirts of Paris, met the police escorts and, with all the flashing lights and full, like, red carpet treatment for the finish. And I was sort of looking at everyone around me who were just beside themselves with excitement and the fanfare of the press. And it was like you were watching somebody else's party. Like, it was just like they're feeling what I should be feeling. And this is always the case at the end of big expeditions and projects. But, the 80 days was probably the greatest, where you think you're going to pull backflips. You think you're going to be euphoric. You think it's going to be the culmination of those 10,000 times that you visualize the finish. And when you get there, all you feel is an incredible, heartfelt sense of relief. It's just this weight that falls off your shoulders. And I know that sounds really ungrateful and unglamorous and almost like it's not worth it, but I don't know. Like, maybe it's good it's that way. Maybe it's good that it's your family and friends who are doing backflips for you, because for yourself at the heart of these projects and the team who have made it happen, it's just this sort of quiet sort of contentment and a sheer heartfelt relief that you've done. You said what you said you're going to do, and it takes time to get any sense of perspective on it.
Wow. Mark, that was incredible. When you said they're feeling what you should be feeling, I know exactly what you mean. But it is that weight off your shoulders, like you have been rescued, or just this stress, this relief. Oh man, that's the addiction, I think, to me, to getting to the finish line the next time, is that sense of relief again.
And I think, a lot's been said on this topic that, of course we've got stresses and strains in our life, but we don't really have anything which in a primal sense is threatening or difficult. And so you've got to go out and find adventure. You've got to find meaning. You've got to put yourself in situations which gives you a sense of purpose. And I always, visualize arrows pointing in and arrows pointing out. Like arrows pointing in is a good thing. You've got to have a sense of sort of self and focus and that internal dialogue, but you've got to get arrows pointing back out into the world as well, in terms of like what's the impact you want to create in your friendship groups, your family, your community, and your work. And I think that metaphor is really powerful when it comes to these big challenges or whatever work you do in life, because it does ground you. Like you've got to be obsessed at times in your life. You've got to get the blinkers on. You got to do things which are quite purposeful personally, but then you've also got to think, well, why does that matter? Like you got to join it back up, because it's so easy in the expedition world and the adventure world to live a very isolated life, to forget to join things up. And I mean, I'm sure you know it as well. A lot of endurance athletes and adventure athletes, these things can sort of be a silo of your life. They can sort of be a sort of something you do, but it doesn't join up particularly well with everything else. And I think it's quite nice to realize that, when you do finish these big projects, it does mean so much to many other people, and you have put yourself under a lot of stress. I mean, there's that sort of that other response where, seeing as the finish isn't what you expect it to be, you better have enjoyed the journey. And there's a lot in that as well. But I do think it's always worth remembering, when you put yourself in harm's way and you do things which are difficult like this, that other people do care, and there is a wider purpose to it. And I find that really grounding, because when you come back from these expeditions, and this is the bit that's rarely talked about, it can be really unsettling for a matter of weeks, if not months, because for a period of your life, you've been allowed to, be completely focused on one task and a routine that's allowed you to do what you do. And then you come back and everyday life's not like that. So it's incredibly unsettling. And that's when I use that metaphor of like, how does it all join back up again? And, how do you find meaning in all these things? I remember when I came back from the 80 days and there was that media fanfare for a couple of weeks and weeks, and it just went on, and I was just needing a bit of space. But I just got into that mindset where, when I was on the road, everything was about making the bike go faster. And then I had a bit of peace, and I got home and I was reading Harriet, my daughter, a bedtime story. And I finished the story, and I said, "Night night, Harriet," gave her a kiss. And then I said, "Is it good?" I said something like, "Is it good having Daddy home?" I don't know why I said it. And she looked at me straight in the eyes and she said, "Yes, Daddy, but you keep saying that." And it was a wonderful moment from a child where I was just like, yeah, get over yourself, Daddy. You might have cycled around the world, but there's other things that matter in life. And it took like a 5-year-old at the time to tell me that, which was quite cool.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's hard to know what this is all like if you haven't done it, but for you now that you have done so much, compared to 99.9% of the people listening, you've done so much. It's just a lifetime worth of achievements and adventures. For someone with this experience, with this mindset at this age, what is next for you? What are the things that you look forward to now?
And I'm quite content with the fact that as an ultra endurance athlete, I don't need to cycle around the world again. I really do see that as my Everest. But I really enjoy a change of challenge. So I've never been a traditional athlete who, enters a race and then enters the same race and then enters again. The round the world is the only thing I've done twice. I've never really been a part of anything more organized or sort of an event. So there's still a bucket list of some of the world's most iconic endurance races and events that I would absolutely, love to test myself in and be a part of. But I also feel that the next chapter in my career, I want to do more to, this is kind of where we started. I kind of want to do more to give other people the quiet confidence to push their ambitions. I've just published a book called Endurance, and it's basically trying to unpack all the stuff I've learned over my career and speaking to people I really respect in the industry who, have wise words to say on the topic. And, if it's not going to be to ride around the world, but if I can give them, I was going to say the next generation, but it's not like the kids, it's people of all ages. If I can impart, the confidence and some of the toolkit to push ambitions in all, it doesn't need to be on the bike. That's something I'd love to focus on. And as an athlete, I continue to try and test myself in different ways. I still think I've got that kid inside me. And it's funny how when you build a public profile around something, people want to put you in a box like, oh, you're that guy. Just get on your bike and do another big road ride. And I've spent most of the last year gravel riding and doing running expeditions. I was obsessed for about a year just before lockdown with trying to break one of the oldest cycling records in the book, which is the hour record on a penny farthing. So I've got a racing penny farthing, from the Victorian times, and the hour record stood at 22 miles, 150 yards, and it was set in Connecticut in the US in 1883. And I spent just over a year trying to break that record. And people keep saying to me, like, why do you keep taking such weird tangents and doing completely different things? Just 18 months ago, I was trying to climb the world's highest volcano and do a 300-kilometer descent from the summit. And everyone was like, you're not even a mountain biker. Like, why? But I quite like that change. I quite like completely different challenges and pitting myself against different environments.
How much respect did that penny farthing attempt give you for the cyclist well over 100 years ago?
That's a great question. That is a great question, because do you know what? There's an arrogance, isn't there? There's an assumption that we must be better, we must be stronger, we must be faster. The guys, and I'm not being sexist with that comment, but it was all guys that raced back in the 1880s. Those athletes, those first cycling athletes, were phenomenal. I mean, there's some pretty legendary stories in terms of, even through to the first Tour de France in 1903 and those early stage races, what they were taking and how they performed. But I mean, let's not take away from the fact that they were phenomenal athletes. I could not, with, I was on a very traditional penny farthing, but I still had clipped in shoes, Lycra, a teardrop aero helmet. Like, I took every modern advantage I could, and I'm a pretty strong rider. I could not break the record that was set 130 years ago. So respect where respect's due. Those guys racing around in tweeds were phenomenal.
When I first heard you were doing that record, or read that you were doing your record and looked up the video, I just assumed you'd be wearing a tweed jacket, penny loafers, a top hat. I just assumed you'd be in that dress, but no, you looked like a modern cyclist, and I thought, oh, he's going to just absolutely destroy this. And the fact that you didn't made me think, who the hell was the athlete that set that record, and what would they do today?
And I mean, if you think you're a good bike rider, I would encourage you to try a penny farthing. See if you can get your hands on one, because it's the ultimate fixie. So my racing penny farthing's got a 54-inch wheel. So the longer your leg length, the longer a wheel you can ride, because you're literally sitting on the wheel, and the radius, so to the middle of the wheel, is your leg length. So if you're a shorter rider, you've got a smaller wheel. You've got no air in your tires, no brakes, and you're sitting on top of this thing. And the only way to go faster is to spin your legs faster. There's no gearing, obviously. So you're going a cadence of like 140 around a banked velodrome. When we tried it indoors at the Derby Velodrome, it's a 43 degrees banked corner, super steep. And you're on something which is like being on horseback. You're so high and you're banked over on this thing. I mean, talk about mind over matter. It's one of the most focused things I've ever done as an athlete, trying to hold that thing on an indoor velodrome for an hour. It was a test. It was amazing. I'm not sure I want to do it again.
Wow. That's unreal. Unbelievable. That's so neat. I love what you're doing. I love the direction you're taking this new mindset. And and about your book, I'm sure people can find that at your website. Is there anywhere else you would like to point them to look for it?
Yeah, I mean, Endurance is actually only available on GCN, on Global Cycling Network at the moment, so you can get it there. It's brand new out. All my other books, I've written 4 other books, are sort of expedition books. They're widely available on Amazon or wherever you get your books. Yeah, I quite like this new one because it was an opportunity to not just storytell, but actually it's all the frequently asked questions. I get emailed or social media messages every day with people asking for hints and tips. And it feels a bit cheap just to say buy the book, but I have literally spent the last 6 months trying to pour out my sort of thoughts and wisdom on this. So I am really proud of it.
That's awesome. It looks like everything from planning an adventure to the mindset, the science behind it, all the important things the things that you have learned over the years put into something to hold and something to read and consume. Fantastic. And be getting a copy. This is awesome.
I'll absolutely send one across. But the interesting part, I think, for anyone listening who's interested in adventure, endurance planning, the assumption, what I call the familiarity bias with most athletes is, it's all about training. It's all about training. It's all about fitness. Training is like the second last chapter. It's right at the end of the book, because the psychology, the logistics, a lot of the nutritional parts, they're what set you up for success. I remember I spent 3.5 years ocean rowing, trying to row a boat further north than anyone's ever gone before through the high Arctic, and then break the mid-Atlantic rowing record. And, there's a classic sport where all people do is sit on the erg, sit on the concept two and row. And you know what? Yeah, you need to be physically strong, but that's not what defines success. The prior preparation, the logistics, knowing in that sport, the electronics on board and, the weather routing and all that stuff. People don't realize their own familiarity bias in expeditions. And, you actually train at your peril. If you think of everyone who's gone for the circumnavigation world record over the last 15 years, most of them have just attempted it as bike riders. So they just, like, I'm 6'3" and 90 kilos. I don't know what that is for US, but I'm a big guy. Mm-hmm. I'm not the world's best bike rider. I think you've actually got to get away from the training to be good at these big expeditions. The training is only one part of the puzzle. And that's what I was trying to get across with the book as well. I'm like, train for sure, get the conditioning. But when it comes to big expeditions, the trick is not breaking down, is not injuring, is having the ability to literally endure. It's not really about how out and out strong you are or how much you can bench.
Wow, you and I are literally the exact same size. So it's good to hear. Good to hear I've got this maybe ability. But Mark, man, there's a million more things I could ask you. I think you've just got such a unique mindset. I don't, gosh, it's so crazy just how you can you make yourself do these things and make it happen. It's mind-boggling. But thank you for joining the Adventure Sports Podcast and just sharing some wisdom, sharing some stories. I can't wait for this episode to come out.
Oh, you're an absolute gent. Thanks for having me on, and I'd love to come back at some point.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to grow in the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.